My name is Kestra, I am 29, and last Christmas dinner became the moment my entire family imploded on live television. Mom had been telling us for months that my sister was still job hunting after her corporate layoff. We all felt sorry for her, even helped with her rent. Then CNN interrupted our holiday meal with breaking news about a massive embezzlement scandal. There she was, my supposedly unemployed sister, being led away in handcuffs as the mastermind behind a $12 million scheme. Hey everyone, before we dive into this wild family betrayal story, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. This tale of lies, stolen money, and Christmas dinner gone wrong is about to get intense, so smash that like button and hit subscribe because you definitely don't want to miss how this family drama unfolds. Trust me, the revenge plot I orchestrated will leave you speechless. The morning started like any other Christmas. I had driven 3 hours from my apartment in Portland to be back home in Sacramento with Mom, Dad, and supposedly struggling Marlo. She had been living back home for 8 months after what Mom called her corporate restructuring situation. Every family dinner, Mom would update us on Marlo's job search struggles, how competitive the market was, how she was being so responsible with her finances. I believed every word because Marlo had always been the golden child. Harvard MBA, fast-track promotion at Morrison Financial Group, the works. When she got laid off, it seemed like just another bump in her otherwise perfect trajectory. She played the part perfectly too, wearing the same clothes repeatedly, claiming she was cutting back on everything, letting Mom pack her leftover dinners. But there were small things that nagged at me. Her car was a brand new Tesla, which she claimed was leased before the layoff. Her designer handbags kept multiplying. When I mentioned it to Mom, she defended Marlo fiercely, saying we should not judge how someone handles financial stress. Dad just shrugged and said Marlo was always smart with money, probably had savings. That Christmas morning, Marlo seemed unusually nervous. She kept checking her phone, jumping at every notification. When I asked if she was expecting calls from potential employers, she snapped that some of us understood the pressure of real career ambitions. Mom quickly changed the subject to my little nonprofit job helping homeless veterans, her usual way of highlighting how I was not measuring up to Marlo's standards. We were halfway through Mom's famous honey glazed ham when the CNN breaking news alert flashed across the television screen. Dad reached for the remote to change channels, but the headline stopped him cold. Morrison financial executive arrested in $12 million embezzlement scheme. My fork clattered against my plate. Morrison Financial Group. That was Marlo's company. The company she had supposedly been laid off from months ago. The reporter continued, Marlo Chen, 32, has been charged with wire fraud, money laundering, and embezzlement in connection with the systematic theft of client funds over a 2-year period. Chen allegedly created false investment accounts and diverted millions of dollars intended for retirement portfolios into personal offshore accounts. The room went silent except for the television. There was my sister's face filling the screen. Her Harvard MBA graduation photo, then footage of her being walked out of the Morrison building in handcuffs just hours earlier. The reporter detailed how she had been living a double life, maintaining her position at Morrison while stealing from elderly clients' retirement funds. Mom dropped her wine glass. The red liquid spread across her white tablecloth like blood. That cannot be our Marlo, she whispered. There must be some mistake. She has been unemployed. She has been struggling. Dad's face had gone gray. He stared at the television screen showing dollar amounts. $2.7 million in Marlo's personal accounts, $4.8 million transferred to Cayman Islands banks, detailed records of luxury purchases including a Tesla Model S, designer clothing, and a secret apartment in San Francisco. I looked at Marlo, who had gone completely pale. Her hands were shaking as she tried to turn off her phone, but it kept buzzing with notifications. The family group chat was exploding with messages from cousins and relatives who were watching the same news coverage. Marlo, I said quietly, is this true? She opened her mouth but no words came out. Then her phone rang. The caller ID showed FBI agent Rodriguez. She stared at it like it was a bomb. Answer it, Dad said firmly. With trembling hands, Marlo picked up the phone. Hello? Her voice was barely a whisper. We could not hear the other side of the conversation, but Marlo's responses told us everything. Yes, this is Marlo Chen. I understand. Right now? But it is Christmas. I see. 15 minutes. She hung up and looked at us with tears streaming down her face. They are coming to arrest me. The room exploded. Mom started crying, asking how this could happen to her perfect daughter. Dad demanded to know if the allegations were true. I just sat there, pieces clicking together in my mind. All those months of feeling guilty for having a stable job while my sister struggled. All the times I had slipped her $20 for gas, or bought her groceries, or listened to Mom guilt me about not helping family enough. How long? I asked. How long have you been stealing? Marlo wiped her eyes, and for a moment, her mask slipped completely. 2 years, she admitted. But it started small. Just a few thousand to cover some trading losses. Then it got bigger. 2 years, I repeated. So you were never laid off? No. She looked down at her hands. I quit last week when I knew they were getting close. I thought I could disappear for a while, figure out how to pay it back. Mom was hyperventilating. $12 million, Marlo? How could you steal $12 million from innocent people? The doorbell rang. Through the front window, I could see 2 black SUVs in our driveway. FBI agents in dark suits were walking up our front steps. Marlo stood up slowly. I need to go pack a bag. You are not going anywhere, Dad said. You are going to face this. As the FBI agents knocked on our door, I realized my entire family dynamic had been built on a lie. For 2 years, while I had been working 60-hour weeks at a nonprofit, barely making ends meet, struggling to pay off my student loans, my sister had been living off stolen money. And my parents had been using her fictional unemployment to make me feel inadequate about my career choices. The agents were patient but firm. They arrested Marlo at our dining room table, right next to Mom's Christmas centerpiece. As they read her rights, she looked at me with this strange expression, not regret, not shame, but something like resentment. As if I was somehow responsible for her downfall by not being successful enough to make her feel like she could ask for help legitimately. After they took her away, the 3 of us sat in stunned silence. The Christmas dinner was ruined, the ham growing cold, the wine stain spreading across Mom's tablecloth. But something else was spreading too, a cold, hard clarity about exactly how my family had treated me all these years. The 3 days after Marlo's arrest were a masterclass in family dysfunction. Mom oscillated between crying fits and angry phone calls to expensive lawyers. Dad retreated to his workshop, refusing to discuss the situation beyond muttering about bad investments and poor judgment. Meanwhile, I found myself appointed as the family's crisis manager, fielding calls from relatives, dealing with reporters, and somehow expected to fix what Marlo had broken. The media attention was relentless. Our family home became a circus of news vans and curious neighbors. Mom refused to leave the house, convinced everyone was judging her parenting. She kept asking me to bring her groceries and handle her errands, as if I did not have my own life to manage back in Portland. But the real eye-opener came when I started digging deeper into the case details. The FBI had released a preliminary victim list: 47 elderly clients whose retirement savings had been systematically drained. I recognized some of the names from Dad's old workplace, neighbors from our childhood street, people who had trusted Marlo because she was Jim and Patricia's daughter from the nice family on Maple Street. Mrs. Henderson from next door had lost her entire retirement fund. She was 83 years old. Mr. and Mrs. Yamamoto, who used to give us Halloween candy, had lost $200,000 they had saved for their grandson's college education. These were not faceless victims. These were people who had watched Marlo grow up, who had celebrated her achievements, who had trusted her with their futures. And my parents' response? They wanted me to help them hire the best defense attorney money could buy. She made a mistake, Mom kept saying. Everyone deserves a second chance. We need to support her through this difficult time. I was sitting in their living room, surrounded by newspaper clippings about the case, when the full scope of their expectations hit me. They wanted me to take out loans to help pay for Marlowe's legal fees. They suggested I could refinance my condo. Mom even hinted that I should start a GoFundMe campaign, framing Marlowe as a victim of corporate pressure and mental health struggles. She is still your sister, Dad said during one particularly tense conversation. Family sticks together no matter what. What about Mrs. Henderson's family? I asked. What about all the people whose retirement savings are gone because Marlowe wanted a Tesla? Mom's face hardened. That is not our responsibility. Marlowe will pay restitution as part of her sentence. But right now, she needs us. That was the moment something inside me snapped. Not the dramatic, explosive kind of snap you see in movies, but a cold, calculated realization that I had been playing by the wrong rulebook my entire life. For 29 years, I had been the responsible one, the reliable one, the one who cleaned up messes and made sacrifices for family harmony. And what had it gotten me? I thought about every time they had made me feel inadequate for choosing social work over finance. Every family dinner where Marlowe's salary was praised while my nonprofit work was dismissed as very noble, dear. Every Christmas where I got books while Marlowe got expensive jewelry. Every conversation where I was expected to be understanding about Marlowe's stress while my own struggles were ignored. The final straw came when Mom asked me to write a character reference letter for Marlowe's sentencing hearing. You could talk about how she has always been a caring sister, Mom suggested. How she has been struggling with unemployment stress. How she is fundamentally a good person who made poor choices. I stared at her. Mom, she stole $12 million from elderly people. She lied to us for 2 years. She let me feel guilty about my job while she was living off stolen money. You are being very selfish right now, Mom replied. This is not about you. This is about supporting your sister when she needs us most. Selfish. That word hit me like a physical blow. Selfish for not wanting to mortgage my future to pay for the legal defense of someone who had stolen from grandparents and retirees. Selfish for being angry about years of emotional manipulation. Selfish for thinking that victims of financial fraud deserved more consideration than the person who had victimized them. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. Instead of writing a character reference for Marlowe, I was going to write victim impact statements. For every single person whose retirement she had stolen. And I was going to make sure the prosecutor had every piece of evidence needed to ensure she faced the full consequences of her actions. But first, I needed to understand exactly how deep this betrayal went. I started by calling my old college roommate Sarah, who worked as a forensic accountant. She agreed to help me trace the money trail, pro bono, as a favor. What we discovered over the next few days was worse than I had imagined. The stolen money had not just paid for luxury items. Marlowe had been using it to maintain an entirely separate lifestyle. The secret San Francisco apartment was just the beginning. She had been taking expensive vacations, buying designer clothes, dining at Michelin-starred restaurants, and even giving generous gifts to friends and romantic partners. She had been living like a millionaire while our parents worried about their own retirement savings. More damning was the evidence Sarah found of premeditation. This was not a desperate person making poor choices under stress. This was a calculated, long-term scheme with sophisticated money laundering techniques. Marlowe had researched offshore banking laws, created fake documentation, and systematically identified the most vulnerable clients to target. The elderly clients she chose were not random. They were people who trusted her because of family connections, people who were less likely to monitor their accounts closely, people who might not notice small withdrawals that gradually increased over time. She had specifically targeted the most trusting victims she could find. Armed with this information, I reached out to the FBI agent handling the case, Agent Rodriguez. I explained that I was Marlowe's sister but that I wanted to help ensure justice for the victims. She was surprised but grateful for my cooperation. Most families circle the wagons in cases like this, Agent Rodriguez told me. It is refreshing to meet someone who understands that the victims deserve justice. I also contacted several of the victims directly. Mrs. Henderson broke down crying when I called to apologize on behalf of my family. Mr. Yamamoto was more angry than sad, but he appreciated that someone from Marlowe's family acknowledged the harm that had been done. These conversations strengthened my resolve. I was not just fighting for abstract justice anymore, I was fighting for real people who had been devastated by my sister's choices and my family's willingness to prioritize protecting the perpetrator over supporting the victims. The strategic pivot was complete. Instead of being the family member who cleaned up messes and kept everyone happy, I was going to be the family member who ensured accountability and justice. Even if it meant burning down every relationship I had ever known. The transformation from family peacekeeper to justice advocate did not happen overnight, but once I committed to the path, everything accelerated quickly. Within a week of my decision to help the prosecution instead of the defense, I had become persona non grata in my own family while simultaneously building an entirely new network of allies dedicated to ensuring Marlowe faced full accountability for her crimes. My first major move was reaching out to the victims' families to organize a support group. Mrs. Henderson's daughter Patricia had been struggling to understand the legal process and felt overwhelmed by the financial implications of her mother's lost retirement savings. Mr. Yamamoto's son David was furious but channeling his anger into research, trying to understand how the fraud had been possible and what safeguards had failed. Together, we formed what we called the Morrison Victims Coalition. Sarah, my forensic accountant friend, volunteered to help families understand the financial documentation and recovery prospects. A local attorney named Rebecca Martinez offered pro bono services to help victims navigate the restitution process. Within 2 weeks, we had 43 of the 47 victims or their families actively participating in our advocacy efforts. The coalition gave me a sense of purpose I had never experienced, even in my nonprofit work. These people were not just statistics or case files, they were real individuals whose golden years had been devastated by my sister's greed, and they deserved someone fighting for them with the same intensity my parents were investing in protecting their criminal daughter. Meanwhile, my relationship with my parents deteriorated rapidly. When Mom discovered I was working with the prosecution, she accused me of betraying family loyalty for attention and sympathy from strangers. Dad was quieter but equally disapproving, suggesting that I was letting my jealousy of Marlowe's success cloud my judgment about family obligations. "You have always resented your sister's achievements," Mom said during one particularly painful phone call. "Now you are using her mistakes to make yourself feel superior. It is petty and cruel." The accusation stung because it contained a grain of truth that I had to confront honestly. Yes, I had been jealous of Marlowe's apparent success. Yes, I had felt inadequate compared to her achievements. But my current actions were not motivated by sibling rivalry, they were motivated by genuine outrage at the harm she had caused and my family's willingness to minimize that harm. The breaking point came when my parents hired Jonathan Blackwood, one of the most expensive white-collar defense attorneys in California, and asked me to contribute $15,000 toward his retainer fee. When I refused, Mom played her final card. "If you cannot support your sister during the darkest time of her life, then maybe you should reconsider whether you want to be part of this family at all," she said. I took her suggestion seriously. For the first time in my adult life, I began imagining what my existence would look like without the constant pressure to manage my family's dysfunction and absorb their emotional chaos. The prospect was not terrifying, it was liberating. My work with the Victims Coalition was generating significant media attention. Local news stations wanted to interview family members who supported the victims rather than defending the perpetrator. National outlets picked up the story as an example of how financial fraud devastates communities. I found myself becoming the public face of accountability, speaking at press conferences and community meetings about the importance of justice over family loyalty. The media exposure brought unexpected allies. Other families who had experienced similar financial crimes reached out with advice and support. Advocacy organizations invited me to speak at conferences about victim rights and family dynamics in white-collar crime cases. I was not just fighting for the Morrison victims anymore, I was becoming part of a larger movement demanding accountability from financial predators. But the most significant development came when Agent Rodriguez called with an update that changed everything. "We have discovered additional evidence," she said. "Your sister's crimes go beyond what we initially uncovered. We believe there are more victims, and the total amount stolen is closer to $18 million, not $12 million. The additional victims included clients from Marlowe's previous job at a smaller investment firm. She had been stealing for almost 4 years, not 2. The pattern was identical, targeting elderly clients with family connections, gradually increasing withdrawal amounts, creating false documentation to cover the missing funds. More disturbing was evidence that Marlowe had been researching her targets' personal lives to maximize her ability to manipulate them. She had notes about which clients were isolated from family, which ones had early-stage dementia, which ones were most trusting of authority figures. This was not crimes of opportunity, this was predatory behavior targeting the most vulnerable possible victims. Agent Rodriguez also shared that Marlowe was not cooperating with the investigation. Despite overwhelming evidence, she was maintaining her innocence and blaming subordinates for any irregularities in client accounts. Her expensive attorney was preparing an elaborate defense claiming that Marlowe was actually the victim of a sophisticated scheme orchestrated by other Morrison employees who had framed her to cover their own crimes. "Your family's support is enabling her continued denial," Agent Rodriguez explained. "She believes that if she maintains her innocence long enough, wealthy parents will bail her out and she will avoid serious prison time." This information crystallized my understanding of why my advocacy work was so essential. Marlowe was not a troubled person who had made mistakes under pressure, she was a calculating predator who had systematically targeted vulnerable elderly people for years. And my parents' unconditional support was preventing her from accepting responsibility and potentially revealing information that could help recover more stolen funds. The Victims Coalition voted unanimously to expand our efforts. We hired Patricia Martinez as our official legal counsel and began coordinating with prosecutors in multiple jurisdictions where Marlowe had committed crimes. We organized rallies outside the courthouse during pretrial hearings. We created a website documenting the real impact of financial fraud on elderly victims and their families. Most importantly, we began preparing comprehensive victim impact statements for sentencing. Instead of the brief, formulaic statements typically submitted in white-collar cases, we were crafting detailed narratives about how Marlowe's crimes had affected every aspect of the victims' lives. Mrs. Henderson's statement described having to move in with her daughter because she could no longer afford her apartment. The Yamamoto family explained how they had been forced to withdraw their grandson from his private college program. My own statement focused on the broader family dynamics and community impact. I wrote about growing up believing that family loyalty meant protecting each other from consequences, and how witnessing my parents' response to Marlowe's crimes had taught me that true loyalty meant holding each other accountable for harmful actions. I described the shame of sharing a name with someone who had preyed on elderly neighbors and family friends. The coalition's work was attracting national attention from victim advocacy groups and law enforcement officials dealing with similar cases. We were invited to testify before a congressional subcommittee about improving protections for elderly investors. Major news networks were covering our story as an example of how families could choose justice over denial. But the most satisfying moment came when I received a call from David Yamamoto with unexpected news. "The FBI contacted us today," he said. "They found additional evidence in Marlowe's apartment that helps them track down more stolen money. They said your information about her research methods was the key to understanding where to look." The additional evidence included detailed files on dozens of potential victims, including their financial histories, family relationships, and psychological profiles. Marlowe had been planning to expand her scheme to target even more elderly clients before her arrest. The files contained enough information to recover an additional $2.3 million from hidden accounts. For the first time since Christmas dinner, I felt genuinely proud of my choices. While my parents were spending their retirement savings on legal fees to protect a predator, I was helping recover stolen money for the victims she had devastated. The contrast could not have been clearer. The stage was set for the confrontation that would determine not just Marlowe's fate, but the future of our entire family dynamic. And I was ready for war. The sentencing hearing was scheduled for a cold February morning, 3 months after that devastating Christmas dinner. By then, the Morrison Victims Coalition had grown into a formidable force. We had recovered additional stolen funds, identified 23 more victims, and compiled the most comprehensive victim impact documentation in California white-collar crime history. Marlowe's defense strategy had become increasingly desperate. Jonathan Blackwood was now claiming that his client suffered from a rare psychological disorder that compelled her to steal, combined with workplace harassment that had driven her to emotional breakdown. They had hired expert witnesses to testify about her mental state and character references from college friends who remembered her as generous and kind. My parents had mortgaged their house to pay for this elaborate defense. Mom had lost 15 pounds from stress and was taking medication for anxiety attacks. Dad looked like he had aged 10 years and 3 months. They still believed they were saving their daughter from an unjust system that failed to understand her underlying goodness. The night before the sentencing, Mom made one final attempt to bring me back into the family fold. "It is not too late," she said during a tearful phone call. "You could still write a letter supporting Marlowe. The judge needs to hear from family members who believe in her capacity for redemption." "Mom," I replied quietly, "I have read every piece of evidence in this case. Marlowe spent 4 years systematically destroying elderly people's financial security. She researched their vulnerabilities and exploited their trust. There is no redemption story here, there is only accountability." "You have become a stranger to me," Mom whispered before hanging up. The morning of sentencing, the courthouse was packed. My parents sat in the front row behind the defense table, looking fragile and defeated. Marlowe appeared calm and composed in her designer suit, still maintaining the facade of innocence that had served her so well throughout the investigation. I sat with the Victims Coalition on the opposite side of the courtroom. Mrs. Henderson had come despite her mobility challenges because she wanted to look Marlowe in the eye while reading her impact statement. Mr. Yamamoto had written a 10-page letter describing how the stolen college fund had forced his grandson to abandon his engineering dreams. Patricia Martinez had prepared a comprehensive presentation about the long-term economic impact on all 47 families. But the most powerful moment came when Judge Catherine Morrison, no relation to Morrison Financial Group, addressed Marlowe directly before hearing victim statements. "Ms. Chen, you have maintained your innocence throughout these proceedings despite overwhelming evidence of your guilt. You have blamed subordinates, claimed mental illness, and portrayed yourself as a victim of circumstances beyond your control. Before I hear from the people you actually victimized, I want to give you one final opportunity to accept responsibility for your actions and express genuine remorse." Marlowe stood slowly, and for a moment I thought she might finally tell the truth. Instead, she delivered a prepared statement about how she was looking forward to clearing her name on appeal and how the real criminals at Morrison Financial Group would eventually be exposed. The collective gasp from the victims section was audible. Even her own attorney looked uncomfortable with her continued denial. Then the victim impact statements began. Mrs. Henderson spoke first, her voice shaking but determined. She described how she had trusted Marlowe because she remembered her as a polite little girl who helped with neighborhood garage sales. She explained how losing her retirement savings had forced her to move in with her daughter's family, abandoning the independence she had worked 70 years to achieve. Mr. Yamamoto's grandson spoke next. He was 19 years old and had been forced to drop out of Stanford when the stolen college fund was discovered. He talked about watching his grandfather cry for the first time in his life, and how his family's American dream had been shattered by someone they had considered a family friend. One by one, 47 victims or their family members shared their stories. The impact was devastating. Several people in the courtroom were crying, including 2 of the court reporters. Through it all, Marlo remained stone-faced, occasionally whispering to her attorney but showing no visible emotion or remorse. When it was my turn to speak, I had prepared extensive remarks about family accountability and the difference between loyalty and enabling. But standing there, looking at my sister's cold indifference to the suffering she had caused, I realized I needed to say something different. Your Honor, I am Marlo's sister, and I have spent the last 3 months learning who she really is for the first time in my life. The person sitting at that defense table is not someone who made mistakes under pressure. She is not someone who fell victim to corporate culture or mental illness. She is someone who spent 4 years carefully planning and executing a scheme to steal the retirement savings of elderly people who trusted her because they knew our family. I paused, looking directly at Marlo. She researched their vulnerabilities. She targeted the most isolated and trusting victims she could find. She escalated her theft gradually to avoid detection. This was not impulsive behavior, this was predatory behavior. Then I turned to address my parents, who were staring at me with expressions of horror and betrayal. I have watched my parents mortgage their house and sacrifice their own retirement security to pay for legal defense of someone who stole retirement security from 47 other families. I have watched them choose protecting a criminal over supporting victims. And I want this court to understand that not everyone in the Chin family believes that wealth and education should protect someone from the consequences of devastating vulnerable people. The courtroom was completely silent when I finished speaking. My parents looked like I had physically attacked them. Marlo was finally showing emotion, but it was anger, not remorse. Judge Morrison took a brief recess before announcing her sentence. When court reconvened, her words were measured but fierce. Ms. Chen, you have committed crimes that strike at the heart of our social contract. Elderly people who worked their entire lives to achieve financial security trusted you with their futures, and you systematically betrayed that trust for personal gain. Your continued denial of responsibility and lack of remorse demonstrate that you pose an ongoing danger to any community you might enter. The sentence was 15 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole for 8 years. Full restitution was ordered, including liquidation of all assets and ongoing garnishment of any future earnings. Marlo would emerge from prison as a middle-aged felon with nothing but debt and a criminal record. As the bailiff led Marlo away in handcuffs, she turned to look at me one final time. Her expression was not sadness or regret, it was pure hatred. In that moment, I realized that my sister had never loved me or our family as people. We had only been valuable to her as sources of support and protection when she needed them. My parents left the courthouse without speaking to me. In the parking lot, Mrs. Henderson hugged me tightly and whispered, "Thank you for choosing us over her." It was the validation I had not known I needed. The weeks following Marlo's sentencing brought a strange combination of relief and devastation that I had not anticipated. The victims felt vindicated, the media declared justice served, and law enforcement praised our coalition's work as a model for future cases. But the personal cost of my choices was becoming clear in ways that left me questioning everything I thought I knew about family, loyalty, and the price of doing the right thing. My parents stopped speaking to me entirely after the sentencing hearing. Not just the cold shoulder or disappointed silence, complete radio silence. They changed their phone numbers and blocked me on all social media platforms. When I drove to Sacramento to attempt a conversation, they refused to answer the door despite my car being visible in their driveway. The message was clear: I had chosen strangers over family, and there would be no forgiveness for that betrayal. But the isolation went deeper than just my parents. Extended family members who had initially supported the prosecution effort began distancing themselves as the reality of Marlo's prison sentence sank in. Cousins stopped inviting me to family gatherings. My Aunt Karen, who had been furious about Marlo's crimes, started posting social media messages about the importance of forgiveness and second chances that felt clearly directed at my advocacy work. The family narrative was shifting to position me as the vindictive sister who had destroyed her own family for publicity and attention. Holiday celebrations that year did not include invitations for me. Wedding announcements arrived for other family members without my name on guest lists. I was being systematically erased from the Chin family story. The psychological impact was more intense than I had expected. Despite my conviction that I had made the right choice, I found myself grieving the loss of relationships that had defined my identity for 29 years. Even problematic family dynamics provide structure and belonging, and suddenly having none of that support system felt disorienting and lonely. My nonprofit work suffered because I was emotionally distracted and struggling to concentrate on other people's problems when my own life felt chaotic. I started seeing a therapist, Dr. Rebecca Santos, who specialized in family estrangement and moral injury, the psychological damage that occurs when you are forced to choose between competing ethical obligations. You are experiencing a form of disenfranchised grief, Dr. Santos explained during one of our sessions. Society expects family relationships to be unconditionally supportive, so when you have to choose justice over family loyalty, you lose not just the relationships but also the social validation for your grief about losing them. The therapy sessions helped me understand that my feelings were normal and justified, but they could not eliminate the practical challenges of rebuilding my entire support system from scratch. Meanwhile, the legal aftermath of Marlowe's case continued, creating complications. The restitution process was complex and contentious, with competing claims from victims and ongoing disputes about asset recovery. As the most visible family member supporting the victims, I found myself involved in legal proceedings and administrative tasks that consumed enormous amounts of time and emotional energy. More disturbing were the ongoing revelations about the extent of Marlowe's criminal behavior. Federal investigators discovered that she had been planning to flee the country before her arrest, with fake identification documents and offshore accounts in 3 different countries. She had researched non-extradition treaties and had been slowly moving stolen money to accounts that would be difficult for authorities to access. The prosecution team also uncovered evidence that Marlowe had been manipulating some elderly victims beyond just stealing their money. She had convinced several isolated clients to change their wills in her favor, claiming that their adult children were financially irresponsible and that she would be a better guardian of their legacy. 2 victims had actually modified their estate planning documents before their deaths, potentially depriving their legitimate heirs of inheritance. This information never became public because it was discovered too late to affect her criminal case, but Agent Rodriguez shared it with me as part of ongoing asset recovery efforts. Learning that my sister had been planning to steal inheritance money from grieving families was somehow even more devastating than the original retirement fraud. The weight of these revelations made me question whether my parents had suspected more than they had admitted. Their fierce defense of Marlowe and willingness to mortgage their house for her legal fees seemed disproportionate unless they understood the full scope of her criminal behavior. I began investigating my parents' financial records, looking for any evidence that they had benefited from Marlowe's stolen money. What I discovered was both better and worse than I had feared. They had not received stolen money directly, but Marlowe had been systematically manipulating them for years in ways that enabled her crimes. She had convinced them to provide character references for her investment clients, lending the weight of their family reputation to legitimize her access to victim accounts. She had used their home address for some financial documents, making them unwitting accomplices to her money laundering schemes. More painfully, I found evidence that my parents had suspected something was wrong but had chosen not to investigate. Dad had questioned the source of Marlowe's expensive purchases several times in family emails. Mom had expressed concern about some of the financial advice Marlowe was giving to elderly neighbors. But instead of pursuing these concerns, they had convinced themselves that successful people sometimes appeared to live beyond their means because of complex financial strategies that ordinary people did not understand. They had chosen willful ignorance over uncomfortable truth, and that choice had enabled additional victims to be defrauded. The discovery that my parents were not just misguided but actively complicit in creating conditions that enabled Marlowe's crimes added another layer of betrayal to an already devastating situation. I was not just grieving the loss of family relationships, I was grieving the realization that the people who raised me were fundamentally different from who I had believed them to be. The lowest point came 6 months after sentencing, when I received a letter forwarded through my attorney from Marlowe in federal prison. I had expected anger, blame or manipulation. Instead, the letter was 3 pages of detailed personal attacks designed to inflict maximum psychological damage. She wrote about every insecurity I had ever shared with her, every moment of self-doubt or family friction she had witnessed, every private struggle I had confided during our childhood. She systematically attacked my career choices, my relationships, my appearance, my personality, my intelligence, and my value as a human being. But the most devastating part was her final paragraph: "You destroyed your own family for the approval of strangers who will forget you exist as soon as this case stops being useful to them. You chose temporary media attention over permanent family bonds, and you will regret that choice for the rest of your life when you realize how alone you really are." The letter hit me at a moment when I was already struggling with isolation and self-doubt. Reading it felt like being psychologically assaulted by someone who knew exactly how to cause maximum damage because they had grown up observing my vulnerabilities. For several weeks after receiving that letter, I wondered if Marlo was right. Had I destroyed something precious and irreplaceable for something temporary and superficial? Had I chosen the approval of strangers over the love of family? Was I going to spend the rest of my life alone because I could not forgive my sister's crimes? Those were the darkest weeks of the entire experience, when the cost of choosing justice over loyalty felt potentially too high to sustain. 2 years after that catastrophic Christmas dinner, I can honestly say that losing my biological family was the best thing that ever happened to me. Not because the pain was not real or the grief was not legitimate, but because being forced to build a new life from scratch taught me the difference between family that happens to you and family that you choose. The transformation did not happen overnight. 4 months after receiving Marlo's letter from prison, I struggled with depression, isolation, and genuine uncertainty about whether I had made the right choices. Dr. Santos helped me understand that this doubt was normal and did not invalidate the moral clarity that had guided my decisions. Doing the right thing does not always feel good, she reminded me during one particularly difficult session. Especially when you have been conditioned to believe that family loyalty should override all other ethical considerations. The breakthrough came when Mrs. Henderson invited me to her 80th birthday celebration. Her daughter Patricia had organized a small gathering of friends and family, and Mrs. Henderson specifically requested that I attend because she wanted to introduce me to her grandchildren as the young woman who fought for justice when her own family would not. Sitting in Mrs. Henderson's living room, surrounded by 3 generations of people who genuinely cared about each other's well-being, I experienced something I had never felt in my biological family: unconditional acceptance combined with mutual respect and accountability. These people loved each other enough to have difficult conversations, to challenge harmful behavior, and to prioritize collective well-being over individual comfort. Mrs. Henderson's grandson Marcus, now 25 and working as a social worker, told me that my advocacy work had inspired him to pursue a career helping elderly victims of financial fraud. Her granddaughter Sarah was studying law with plans to specialize in victim advocacy. The impact of our work was creating generational change in ways that extended far beyond the original case. That evening marked the beginning of my real healing process. Instead of grieving what I had lost, I began celebrating what I had gained: a chosen family of people who shared my values and supported my growth, professional opportunities that aligned with my principles, and self-respect based on authentic choices rather than inherited obligations. The Morrison Victims Coalition had evolved into a permanent organization providing support and advocacy for elderly fraud victims nationwide. I was hired as executive director, turning my crisis management experience into a meaningful career that paid significantly more than my previous nonprofit work while making a genuine difference in people's lives. My relationship status changed as well. At a victim advocacy conference in Denver, I met James Rodriguez, Agent Rodriguez's younger brother, who worked as a federal prosecutor specializing in white-collar crime. Our first conversation was about the intersection of family loyalty and criminal justice, and I knew immediately that I had found someone who understood the complexity of my choices without needing extensive explanation. James had prosecuted similar cases and seen how family dynamics often enable continued criminal behavior. He respected my decision to prioritize victims over family loyalty because he understood from professional experience how rare and valuable that choice was. Our relationship developed slowly and thoughtfully, built on shared values and mutual respect rather than the unconscious patterns and inherited obligations that had characterized my family relationships. For the first time in my life, I was with someone who encouraged my strength rather than trying to manage or minimize it. The legal aftermath of Marlowe's case continued providing validation for my choices. She served her full sentence with no early release because she never acknowledged responsibility or showed genuine remorse. Upon release, she was required to live in a halfway house and work minimum wage jobs with all earnings above basic living expenses going to victim restitution. My parents, meanwhile, lost their house to foreclosure 2 years after the sentencing. The legal fees had exhausted their savings, and Dad's early retirement meant they could not recover financially. They moved to a small apartment in a less expensive part of Sacramento and were forced to rely on Social Security and small pension payments. I felt sad about their financial struggles, but I also felt vindicated that their choice to prioritize defending a criminal over supporting victims had natural consequences. They had gambled their financial security on protecting someone who was fundamentally selfish and manipulative, and they lost that gamble because they chose loyalty over reality. The most satisfying development came when I received a letter from David Yamamoto informing me that his grandson had graduated from community college with an engineering degree and been accepted to transfer to UC Berkeley with a full scholarship. The stolen college fund had been mostly recovered through restitution payments, and the young man had used the experience of overcoming adversity to write a compelling scholarship application. Your advocacy work gave our family hope during our darkest period, David wrote. But more importantly, it showed my grandson that justice is possible when good people choose to fight for it instead of accepting that bad people will face no consequences. Reading that letter, I realized that my choice to prioritize strangers' well-being over family loyalty had created more authentic love and meaningful connection than 29 years of biological family obligation had ever provided. The final piece of closure came 3 years after the sentencing, when I received notification that Marlowe had violated her parole by attempting to access victims' personal information through social media. She was returned to federal prison to serve an additional 2 years, demonstrating that her criminal behavior was ongoing and deliberate rather than a temporary aberration caused by external pressures. My parents did not contact me about this development, confirming that they remained committed to denial and enabling rather than accountability and growth. Their silence felt like freedom rather than rejection. Today, I am 32 years old and living in Denver with James and our adopted daughter Maria, a 7-year-old whose previous family situation involved financial exploitation by relatives. We chose each other deliberately and carefully, building our relationships on honesty, mutual respect, and shared commitment to justice and growth. My chosen family includes Mrs. Henderson, who sends birthday cards and holiday gifts, David Yamamoto, who calls monthly to check on my well-being, Patricia Martinez, who has become both a professional mentor and personal friend, and dozens of other people whose lives intersected with mine through our shared commitment to accountability over convenience. Looking back, that devastating Christmas dinner was not the destruction of my family, it was the revelation that what I thought was family was actually just a collection of people who shared DNA but not values. Real family consists of people who love you enough to support your growth, challenge your mistakes, and celebrate your courage to do difficult things. Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and doing what you know is right? I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. These situations are more common than people realize, and sharing our experiences helps others facing similar choices. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories about finding strength in difficult circumstances. And please share this video with anyone who might need to hear that choosing justice over enabling is not betrayal, it is love in its truest form. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to protect people from the consequences of their harmful choices. Your real family will understand and support that courage, while the people who demand unconditional enabling regardless of harm were never really your family at all.